Now I'm going to cook my bacon for these corn dodgers. It's going to give me the bacon grease I need for them too. I like frying bacon pieces in a little saucepan because it renders the fat better than a frying pan does. And it has these high sides so that when the grease does pop, it doesn't go all over the stove. It's also easier to flip and turn these bacon pieces with a spoon than it is with a spatula. So eventually this grease is going to stop popping and it'll just foam up. I've got my burner on a medium heat, by the way. Okay, it's done now. All that fat's rendered out. It stopped foaming up. That's how you can tell. So I'm going to take it off the burner. And now my greens are going back on the burner. Now you cook your bacon pieces like that and you'll have perfect bacon bits. And here's the bacon grease for my corn dodgers. The best way to chop up crispy bacon bits is to put them on a paper towel and fold this towel over. And you take a knife with a blunt end and you pound them. My phone's bouncing, ain't it? I'll do it like this. I'm sure you could use a mallet for this, you know, a meat tenderizer mallet. You could use one of those, you could use a rolling pin, you could use a hammer. Yeah, use what you got. Guard the other side of the blade with your hand and use your thumb to push down on the top of the blade like this, so that when you do chop the bacon, the pieces won't fly everywhere. Now I'm going to make corn dodgers. Don't confuse corn dodgers with hot water cornbread. They're not the same thing. Hot water cornbread is the old style that was made by the Native Americans, and corn dodgers are the updated version that includes the addition of wheat flour. So that means these things were made after the Civil War during the Reconstruction era. Corn dodgers were the predecessor to Southern cornbread. When you make corn dodgers and you use more liquid than what I've got, and then you make it into a batter and it's really loose, you pour it into a hot cast iron skillet and bake it, then you've got Southern cornbread. That's the only difference. Corn dodgers are also the predecessor to hush puppies because I've got minced onions in them. I'm going to go over the ingredients with you. I have a cup of cornmeal, half a cup of AP flour, half a teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of baking powder, quarter teaspoon of pepper, half a small onion, very finely chopped. I cross-chopped it to the point where it's almost minced, and that's where you want it. 8 strips of bacon, cooked and finely chopped. You want it almost a powder. The bacon grease. It's about 1 tablespoon of bacon grease that came off of the strips of bacon. Quarter cup of pot liquor from the greens. A cup of buttermilk. Now once you have your dry ingredients mixed up, you want to heat your buttermilk until it's almost boiling. This is what's going to begin the cooking process in your cornmeal. I'll put this buttermilk in the microwave for 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Now I'm going to pour it into my cornmeal. Now if it's too loose, you can add cornmeal to it, a tablespoonful at a time. This has to make a dough. It's not going to be a batter, it needs to be a stiff dough. This is going to happen if you get too much liquid or there's too much moisture in your flour. It needs to be a dough, but if you get too much liquid in it and it's runny, you add more cornmeal and flour to it and it'll be okay. But you have to remember, for every 2 tablespoons of cornmeal, you have to add 1 tablespoon of flour. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. See, that flour is responsible for the dough. You can't make proper corn dodgers without that flour. I'm actually going to have to add more salt and more baking powder to this. So long as my ratios are right, it'll work. Now before it gets too stiff, I'm going to add in my pot liquor. I only put in 2 tablespoons of pot liquor. And I'm going to add in my bacon grease. And this time, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of baking powder. This is one of those things you learn to make by feel in order to get it right. Now the bacon bits go in, and the onions. You have to fold these ingredients into this dough because it's pretty stiff, and that's the way it's supposed to be. This is corn dodger dough. It's real thick. There you go. I'm going to let this dodger dough rest, and in the meantime, I'm going to heat up a skillet full of bacon grease. The bacon grease in the dough is going to cool down and it's going to firm up that dough a little bit. You can even put it in the refrigerator if you want to. You know, food holds memories. And I think the reason these old-time recipes from the slavery days and from the Depression era were abandoned because it reminded people of hardship. And they want to, move on. We're in a better economic situation. People generally have more money than they used to have. Food is more readily available. People don't want to eat like this anymore. I used to be a professional quilter, and people today are fascinated with those Depression era quilts and the flour sack dresses the women used to wear. My grandma, my great grandma, they remembered that time period very well, and my father remembered it with vivid clarity. And they all told me they don't care anything about those old flour sack quilts and those flour sack dresses because flour sacks reminded them of the hardship that they endured. As we move forward in time, we look back on the past and we glorify hardship. And, maybe we ought to give pause for thought and, just think about what these people went through. They had to wear flour sacks because they had no choice. They couldn't afford anything better. They couldn't afford to buy suits and dresses off the rack at Macy's, or Nordstrom's or JCPenney. Those stores were a big deal way back then, and they're still a big deal today. The old wish books, the Sears and Roebuck catalog. They used to look through those books and the children would just dream of having a new pair of shoes. Today, we might buy 2 or 3 pairs of new shoes and not think anything of it. People really suffered. I went through a period where I washed clothes entirely by hand because I wanted to know what it was like. It was rough. It hurt my back. My jeans didn't always get dry on the line. It would take a couple of days, sometimes 3 days, for my jeans to dry outside. I understood why people only washed their clothes maybe once or twice a year, and that was it. They would have maybe 2 changes of clothing, 2 dresses, 2 suits, and you wore one while you were washing the other one. You had your underclothing, the muslin, that could be washed more frequently because it was thin. That muslin protected your good clothes from sweat, and it helped to keep them clean. And we don't do that anymore. We've got fancy washer machines now and people are washing their clothes once a week. Our ancestors' heads would be spinning if they saw the way we were living today, and people still complain. My mother and her 2 sisters and their parents lived in a 3-room shack east of Aaron Springs, and they drew water from a hand-dug well. They had a hand pump outside, and they'd draw water with that hand pump and bring it into the house for everything, for cooking, for drinking, for bathing. They didn't have indoor plumbing. They had an outhouse. The 3 girls slept in one bed. There was no insulation. They didn't have a fireplace. I think they have a wood cook stove that they used also for heat. In the summertime, they'd sleep outside on a screened-in porch. They lived like that right up until Grandpa died in 1962. They converted an old school bus into a camper, and they went to town in it. They stayed in that camper through the broom, corn, and cotton harvest. When the harvest was done, they collected their pay, did what shopping they needed to do in town, and go back to the homestead. Personally, I don't want to lose all that old knowledge. I want to retain it because I feel like it's still useful. There may come a time in the future when people really have to endure hardship again, and I'm going to be prepared for it one way or another. And if those times don't come during my lifetime, I want to be able to share my knowledge and pass on my skills to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. You know, whoever is willing to learn, I'll teach. Put some bacon grease in a skillet. You can make these in a cast iron skillet if you want to. If you want to make this whole batch all at once, use a bigger skillet. But you can freeze this dough, and you can even make some of these corn dodgers and put them on a cookie sheet on parchment paper and flatten them out a little bit, freeze them, and then put them in a bag. And anytime you want corn dodgers, you can just take them out, thaw them out a little bit, and fry them up. Take a level tablespoon of this dough and another spoon and push it down into this hot grease. Flip it when it gets brown, and I like to mash them out. That's all of these I'm going to make. Now, I have heard of people putting these dodgers in the hot boiling water with their greens, but I don't like doing that because they kind of disintegrate and they get all mushy, and the cornmeal gets into your greens, and it's just bleh. These are corn dodgers. See, they look like little gold coins. That's what they're supposed to look like. That's the other side of them. This dough has gotten a little more stiff since I've been letting it sit. So I'm gonna put some on a baking sheet and freeze it. It took a while, but I got most of them on here. I'm going to put these in the freezer and then put them in a bag. I'm going to dish out some of these greens. This juice is what we call pot liquor. It's not Liquor, it's Likker, liquor. And it is delicious. That pot liquor is what we like to sop up with cornbread. Okay, right here's my corn dodgers. And this is my collard greens with ham and turnips. And this is one of my favorite southern dishes. I realized when I made these collard greens that the ham broth way back in the day would have been made with roasted pork neck bones, tail bones, leg bones, you name it. Because I boiled 3 ham hocks and didn't get any broth at all. I got plenty of gelatin. I got a lot of damn gelatin, but no broth at all. So I had to make this juice with ham broth, and it took 12 teaspoons of it to get it to taste right. These are good. I don't know why we ever stopped making them. They're delicious. And they are most definitely the predecessor to a hush puppy. And they're the predecessor to iron skillet cooked cornbread. Dunk it in my pot liquor and see what it tastes like. Tastes good. Now I know why people come up with the idea of crumbling southern cornbread into their beans. That's why people in Oklahoma and Texas eat pinto beans. That comes from the South. Me personally, I can't do it because I've got texture issues. This must be the southern idea of soup and crackers. I'm going to sit here and finish my collard greens and Dodgers. Bye, y'all.